Welcome to FilmProv, where everything is made up and my opinions don't matter. This is the second part to the video I made a few weeks ago about Spider-Man 2002 by director Sam Raimi. I'm making these videos in response to the recent theatrical re-releases of all the Spider-Man movies, and the ensuing online discourse around them. For years, the Sam Raimi Spider-Man trilogy has been put up on a pedestal as the gold standard of superhero movies, with people often lamenting about how the numerous comic book films we've gotten in the following 2 decades have paled in comparison to Raimi's movies. This is especially the case with the subsequent Spider-Man movies. Of course, people hated The Amazing Spider-Man and its sequel once they immediately followed up the Raimi movies because they weren't the Raimi movies, and then the Tom Holland MCU movies came out, and now people hate those and think The Amazing Spider-Man is actually underrated, and the Raimi movies are just canonized at this point. This has always rubbed me a bit the wrong way, because while I like and grew up with the Sam Raimi movies, there have certainly been plenty of great films that have come out since. To me, this has always felt like nostalgia talking, but I've decided to put my money where my mouth is and finally re-examine these movies. Now, this is my first viewing of any of these movies in a good few years, and my first actual critical breakdown in a very long time. No rose-tinted glasses, no nostalgia, just sitting down and seeing how these movies hold up as films. In my last video, I covered the first movie, and I definitely did not go easy on it. Now, I was originally going to do Spider-Man 2 and 3 as one single video, because I thought that, well, I had a lot of hot takes about Spider-Man 1, but I feel like I have less new things to say about the second and third movies. However, as I got into editing, I got my final audio cut, pushing around an hour, a little over an hour, so I figured I don't want to edit an hour-long video, and I don't want to make you guys wait until I finish editing an hour-long video, so I'm just going to break them all up. Each movie gets its own video, so this one is just going to be Spider-Man 2, and we'll cover Spider-Man 3 next time. Now, like I said in the last video, I'm not going to be commenting much on the over-the-top campiness or silliness in these movies. It's definitely an intentional choice by Sam Raimi to replicate the tone of a Silver Age comic, and whether you like them ironically, sincerely, or not at all, says more about your personal taste in media than it does about the film itself. But without further ado, let's get into Spider-Man 2.
A Spider-Man does whatever a Spider-Man.
Now, while I wasn't very nostalgic for Spider-Man 1, I was really too young to see it in theaters, I never owned it on DVD, and I watched it only a few times as a kid. This one is a very different story. I saw Spider-Man 2 in theaters, I absolutely loved it. I've had it on DVD ever since, and I've watched it well over 100 times probably. So this is probably the one that I've had the hardest time analyzing, because, I'm so familiar with the material, I'm so close to it, that it's hard for me to actually look at it and break down the elements. But with this last viewing, I think I did a pretty good job. And I gotta say, starting right off the bat as soon as the movie starts, I love the opening scene. In general, I love slice of life scenes in superhero movies. It really makes the world feel a little more lived in, feel a little more fleshed out. I like seeing what their daily life is in between, world-ending supervillains. But what makes this one extra special is the fact that this isn't about Spider-Man stopping street-level crime like bank robbers or muggings or stuff like that. It's literally just him trying to deliver a pizza, but as Spider-Man. Lots of people work delivery jobs or work little minimum wage jobs, and it's cool to see how being a superhero changes that. This whole scene is high energy, it builds the stakes without ever having any real danger, and it honestly immediately sets the stage for Peter's arc. Because what happens? Peter Parker has a responsibility, but being Spider-Man gets in the way of it, and it causes negative consequences for Peter Parker. He loses his job. The whole movie is basically about Peter Parker struggling to find that work-life balance between his responsibilities as Peter Parker and his responsibilities as Spider-Man, and so we kind of kick that off right off the bat. In addition to kicking things off right off the bat, Harry Osborn sucks. The first second we meet him. Yeah, we all know James Franco as a person sucks, and so we don't like watching him in this movie, and he doesn't do a super good job as an actor in this movie, but just the way the character is written is so unlikable. The second we see him, he immediately says, "Happy birthday, Peter," and then just 180 heel turns, starts rambling about how he hates Spider-Man and wants to kill Spider-Man.
Be honest with me. If you knew who he was, would you tell me?
Like, the whole tragedy of Harry Osborn becoming the Green Goblin after losing his father is built around the fact that Harry Osborn is Peter's best friend, and we feel for their relationship. In the comics, we had a long time to get to know Harry before he ever became the Green Goblin. In this movie, almost every time he interacts with Peter, he just immediately turns on him. And we don't even really like Harry from the first movie, because in the first movie, he just straight up started dating Peter's crush, knowing that she was his crush, which, you know, bro code, man. The whole birthday scene kind of contains a lot of different aspects of this movie that I don't really like, all wrapped into one scene. We have Harry being a pissy little asshole, and then we get introduced to the foreclosure of Aunt May's house, which money troubles has always been a part of Peter Parker. I know, people complain that Tom Holland's Spider-Man has a fucking iPhone or whatever, but like, Aunt May struggling to keep her house is just such an uninteresting and inconsequential part of this movie. It never really plays into Peter's story. It doesn't affect the plot or the characters. It's literally just a reason Aunt May is sad, which she doesn't need a reason because, you know, we could still just have her grieve Uncle Ben. And there's this scene, this really awkward scene, where after the party's over, Aunt May gives Peter a $20 bill, and Peter acts all, you know, selfless and says, "You need the money more than I do." And there's this very dramatic read from Rosemary Harris.
I can't take that.
Yes, you can. You can take this money from me. For God's sake, it's not much. Now take it. And don't you dare leave it here.
It's so awkward and needlessly dramatic. It transitions into an actually good moment where Aunt May reveals some of her grief.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's just that I miss your Uncle Ben so much.
Like I said, if you're gonna make her sad about or upset about something, just have it be Uncle Ben. But the way we got to this moment is just weird and clunky and uncomfortable. And the third lame element of this movie that's introduced in this birthday scene is Mary Jane. Again, I'm not going to spend too much time on her because she's one element that people have talked a lot about, but the Mary Jane romance really just continues to suck in this movie and actually kind of gets a little worse than the first movie, because first movie, yeah, she kind of bounced around from boyfriend to boyfriend and didn't have much of a personality outside of that. But then it ends with her finally saying, "I love you, Peter," and then Peter, you know, turning her away because he doesn't want to have a girlfriend while he's Spider-Man, to keep her safe, yada yada, whatever. Well, in this movie, she just ping-pongs back and forth with Peter's emotions. Like, in this backyard scene, she tries to kiss him, and then afterwards, she immediately tells him she has a boyfriend.
I'm seeing somebody now.
Every one of their scenes in these movies causes me physical pain. I can pull out so many lines that I just can't stand.
I'm different. Punch me, I bleed.
I liked seeing you tonight, Peter.
Oh boy, yeah.
After all these years, he's nothing to me but an empty seat.
You want to get some chow mein?
Peter, I'm getting married.
I always imagine you getting married on a hilltop. I've been reading poetry lately.
Whatever that means.
And then from Peter's perspective, he obviously still loves Mary Jane, but he chose not to be with her. However, he spends almost this whole movie trying to get her to be with him. Like, he doesn't want to date her, but he starts to learn poetry and then recite it to her really awkwardly in the middle of a conversation.
Day by day, he gazed upon her. Day by day, he sighed with passion.
He gets upset when she dates someone else, and it's just so frustrating and uncomfortable and awkward. It just makes you hate every single second you're watching it. Now, at least at the very end of this movie, she calls him out on his bullshit and points out how stupid it is for them not to be together, but just after 2 movies of this, it's just such a headache. And the fact that it doesn't get better once they're together in the movie after this just makes it so much worse. But I'm going to talk more about that when I get to Spider-Man 3. After the birthday scene, we follow Peter home to his apartment, which I don't know why people say that Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man was so poor. I mean, look at this apartment. In New York City, this has got to be like $30,000 a month. Plus, it's run by Mr. Dickovich, who is absolutely perfect and the best character in any of these movies.
Hi. Hi. What's hi? Can I spend it? It's no big deal. But if you feel that bad about it, you can buy me pizza sometime. Today's good. Promises were crackers. My daughter would be fat. Listen, it's a free country. It's not rent-free country. I have ears like a cat and eyes like a rodent. Rent? If it's a woman you're calling, then you say, you're a good woman, I'm good man.
Later, after a few scenes of just hammering in the fact that Peter's life sucks, which I don't have a problem with. I like having some struggle with my Peter Parker. But then he meets Otto Octavius, soon to be Doc Ock. This scene is mostly just establishing the character of Doc Ock, but it does have a small hint of foreshadowing that I guess is supposed to set up Peter's arc, where Otto says that,
if you keep something as complicated as love stored up inside, it can make you sick.
And that, I guess, is supposed to explain how Peter loses his powers and, you know, gets a little impotent. But it's one line and it's very easy to miss, and it doesn't, I'd say, adequately set anything up. But I'll get more into that a little bit later. But after this, Peter's invited to the science demonstration where Otto reveals his device for creating and sustaining fusion. Pretty cool. It's in his apartment for some reason. It goes wrong, he gets the metal arms welded onto his body and becomes Doc Ock. And from there, we go to the hospital scene. Everyone has already commented on this, I'm not going to say anything new, but goddamn if it's not the coolest scene in the entire movie. It is 100% Sam Raimi firing on all cylinders, and you can see so much Evil Dead in this scene. But once you step back and look at the whole movie, it kind of makes you sad, because with Spider-Man 1, I made a point of recognizing how much of that movie, both its cinematography and its editing style, is very Sam Raimi-ish. But in the subsequent two movies, his style gets toned down more and more. Like in this movie, we get like this scene and then like maybe one or two editing choices, but it's significantly less than the first movie. And then by the time the third movie comes around, it's almost non-existent. The third movie is shot and edited very traditionally. So it's a bit of a shame that even though I think this movie is better than the first, that Sam Raimi style, that Sam Raimi sauce, if you will, is just really watered down. But in the hospital scene, goddamn Doc Ock looks so cool. And he looks so cool throughout the whole movie. His arms look so fantastic, and that's because, one, they have a very cool design, but two, they're a very good mix of both CGI and practical effects. Like, you look at the behind the scenes, they actually were straight up puppets. That's because this movie was made in that 10-year period after Jurassic Park, where they really tried to make practical and CG work as best they could together. Now with Doc Ock, people talk about how he's a deep and sympathetic villain, and like, he kinda is, maybe? He certainly garners sympathy in the beginning and then at the end with, you know, his dead wife and his crushed dreams. But as soon as he does his literal heel turn, he becomes a cartoonishly evil villain. Between the fact that his evil turn occurs because his arms talk to him for some reason, and the fact that when he is being evil, he seems to genuinely enjoy it, he really doesn't strike you as a tragic figure. Now, it's not necessarily a bad thing. Molina's definitely got the villain riz. I love a good charismatic villain, but it's just not super complex. And that's not even saying this with 20 years of hindsight. Even before this movie came out, we were starting to get some sympathetic villains. But after this, we get our first matchup between Spider-Man and Doc Ock once he robs the bank, and I gotta say, the idea of this bank storing its money in big bags of gold coins is hilarious. I know in the novelization there's some justification for it, but it's just, without that context, just with what we get in the movie, it's just really, really funny that this bank works like Scrooge McDuck's vault.
Admitting we're monsters and clawing joyfully for some of his cash.
A little bit later in the film, we get the black tie event honoring John Jameson, J. Jonah Jameson's astronaut son, and I just want to point out that I find it really weird, but in a funny way, that this presenter refers to the guest of honor, John Jameson, as delicious.
The handsome, the heroic, the delicious Captain John Jameson.
Like, in a professional setting, to a crowd full of people, including reporters, she calls him delicious, but, you know, sure. During this scene, it's revealed that he actually is Mary Jane's boyfriend, only not anymore because now he's her fiancé.
Miss Mary Jane Watson just agreed to marry me.
And this is the moment that finally, I guess, is the straw that breaks the camel's back and causes Peter Parker to ultimately lose his powers. Which, yes, Peter's impotence makes no sense, both literally and thematically. Obviously, we're never given an actual reason as to how it works. It's implied via Doc Ock's one throwaway line and this kind of awkward scene with this doctor wearing a t-shirt where it's like psychosomatic, where his subconscious doesn't want to be Spider-Man, so it makes his body stop being Spider-Man. In the first movie, we see that being Spider-Man is part of his literal DNA. I don't think you can just turn that off by being depressed, but sure, why not? And this leads to the movie adapting Spider-Man No More.
I'm Spider-Man. No more.
Peter Parker gives up being Spider-Man because the burden of his responsibility has ruined every other aspect of his life, the final straw being MJ getting engaged to someone else. However, in this movie, the way it's presented, Peter doesn't give it up entirely of his own free will. It's partially because he loses his powers. Like, yeah, the power is because deep down he's having doubts of being Spider-Man, but like, before he finally throws the suit away, he tries to be Spider-Man. He tries to use his powers, so like it's confusing because it's not entirely clear, like, does he want to be Spider-Man? He doesn't quit because he just gets tired of it. He quits because he can't, because his powers don't work anymore. So it kind of undermines the whole moral lesson of the story when Peter Parker only quits because his hand is kind of forced, which kind of takes away the impact of his choice. I mean, look at the Bang fight. He's not thinking about Mary Jane. He's thinking about the fact that he has to defeat Doc Ock because he has to protect Aunt May. And in the middle of the fight, his web stopped working. Why? I don't know. I wish he would have just made the choice to quit entirely of his own accord, and then maybe he starts losing his powers from atrophy or something. Like, just kind of switch those two beats, and I think the story would be a lot stronger. Because then his quitting Spider-Man wouldn't be a consequence of losing his powers. Losing his powers would be a consequence of him quitting Spider-Man. And what's more, I wish we could have seen more consequences of him not being Spider-Man. Like, show us what New York is like in Spider-Man's absence. We see like a mugging or two going on in the corner, we see a police chase without knowing why it's happening, but the time we spend while Peter's quit being Spider-Man is largely upbeat, lighthearted. It shows how Peter Parker's life gets better, but we should be able to see the consequences. We should be able to see maybe that crime is going up, that people are being hurt, that violence is escalated. Let us know that Peter Parker's choice to not be Spider-Man is having an effect on the greater world around him. However, after the raindrop falling on your head montage, we get probably my least favorite scene in this movie, and that is the scene where Peter Parker talks to May about Ben's death. This is the scene where he finally addresses his own guilt. He bares his soul and he confesses the fact that he holds himself responsible for Ben's death to May. In these movies, and in the comics, and in most iterations, May is Peter's moral compass. Obviously, Ben is the one that taught him great power comes great responsibility, but she's the one who keeps him grounded and always reminds him to do the right thing. What's more, she's his eternally loving mother figure. She's his one comfort, his one connection to his old life. And in this scene, May abandons him. He tells her that he made a choice that resulted in Ben's death, and she doesn't comfort him. She looks horrified, doesn't say anything, rejects his hand. He's literally reaching out to her, and she rejects it and just stands up and walks away. No absolution, no forgiveness, nothing. Later, Peter tries to talk to her about it, I would assume to get some closure, but May literally waves it away. She says she loves him and he was brave for telling the truth, but she never actually says it wasn't his fault to make him feel better or forgive him. Nothing. It seems like it would be such an important moment for these two characters, and it just doesn't go anywhere. It literally does not have resolution, and it's just frustrating. But instead of giving him closure and forgiving him, what May does do is more or less give Peter the moral of the story, which has nothing to do with Ben's death or Peter's guilt or anything. It just goes back to the whole balancing work and life responsibility thing. She tells Peter,
I believe there's a hero in all of us that keeps us honest, gives us strength, even though sometimes we have to be steady and give up the thing we want the most. Even our dreams.
That is essentially the moral of the story, the lesson, the theme that Peter learns. However, it's weird, because this comes after he rushes into the burning building to save the child, so then that confuses you because has he not already decided to be a hero again? There's several beats that occur in this movie that sort of turn Peter back around to being a hero. It's saving the little girl, but failing to save the other person. It's hearing the lesson from Aunt May, and then it's finally him getting his powers back. And they kind of feel out of order. Peter tries to help someone and be a hero, but it doesn't give him his powers back. Then May tells him that he should be a hero and give up what he wants. Then, afterwards, he tries to use his powers again because he realizes that he wants to be Spider-Man, but then it fails, and he falls off a building. Literally verbalizing that he has to have a strong focus on what he wants, and that he knows he wants his powers back, he knows he wants to be Spider-Man and help people, and he's willing to give up and make sacrifice for it, but that doesn't make a difference. He's literally learned the point of the movie, and it doesn't affect anything. The third moment is when he actually does get his powers back, which is once Mary Jane gets kidnapped by Doc Ock. Then Peter has to obviously go fight him for it. That has absolutely nothing to do with Peter learning sacrifice. If anything, it's kind of a selfish reason for him to become Spider-Man again. His powers don't kick back in until he personally is affected by their absence. And it's this handling of the arc that really kind of confuses me. For a movie that's so lauded for depicting the struggles of this character balancing the conflicting aspects of his life and making it central to the theme and story of the movie, it just kind of fumbles it at the 1-yard line. It sucks because this really is the best of the trilogy, and it genuinely is a very good movie. Like, I'm complaining right now because I feel like all the negative parts need to be addressed. However, this sort of central aspect of the film, it just baffles me, and it kind of drags down the whole thing. And it's really the first thing I think of whenever I hear people talking about how much they love this movie that always kind of holds me back from joining them. However, not all hope is lost, because I also don't understand the chocolate cake scene. The scene where Ursula Dickovich, the daughter of Mr. Dickovich, obviously best character, brings Peter a piece of chocolate cake.
Would you like a piece of chocolate cake?
And they eat the chocolate cake. Now I'm convinced that this scene is somehow integral to understanding the theme and plot and entire purpose of this movie. And if I can crack it, it will all make sense. Expect a follow-up video as soon as I figure this out. But anyway, Mary Jane gets kidnapped by Doc Ock, Peter gets his mojo back, and he's gotta go fight Doc Ock. That leads to the train scene, and well, train scene good. Train scene very good. Excellent action, excellent effects, good use of both trying to defeat the villain and save civilians. I even used it as a point of positive comparison in my video about the last movie, in which I talked about how that movie's action sucked, but other Spider-Man movies have good action. This is a good action scene. Plus, it ends with that nice moment where Peter is surrounded by the people he saved, fully embraced by the city, and really being reminded of why he does what he does. This is a good final beat in Peter's arc. I'll say it was set up mostly good throughout the movie, then the last few beats, as I mentioned before, kind of jumbled it up, made it a little messy, but this is a very nice conclusion for it. Then Peter gets kidnapped and taken to Harry. And this, I'm going to be shouting about this a lot when I get to Spider-Man 3, but this is just so fucking frustrating, because this is the moment where Harry finds out that Peter is Spider-Man. Alright, he takes the mask off and boom, it's Peter. He's betrayed, he's devastated, whatever. Why doesn't Peter just tell Harry what happened? Like, I understand that MJ's been kidnapped and Doc Ock is building his fucking doomsday device and time is of the essence, but it takes maybe 15 seconds, while Harry is still shocked and probably would still listen to you, to explain that, Harry, your father was the Green Goblin. I was in a fight with him. He tried to kill me by impaling me with his glider, but I dodged it and it impaled him instead. His final dying words were, "Don't tell Harry. I didn't want to hurt you, but I didn't kill your father. I'm sorry." Okay, maybe that wasn't 15 seconds, but still, we can do it with plenty of time to save Mary Jane. Because him failing to give any kind of explanation just sets up all the stupidness that we see in the third movie. Again, I'll come back to it. But either way, Peter just kind of, I guess, admits to killing his father and then leaves and goes to fight Doc Ock. And I will say, first off, the final fight with Ock is pretty short. But also, for the most part, Doc Ock surprisingly doesn't provide much of a thematic foil for Peter. I mentioned in my last video that Spider-Man villains are at their best when they can somehow provide some kind of contrast or a foil for Spider-Man, either just him as a person, you know, most of them are scientists or got their powers through science. Instead of learning responsibility, they use it for selfish reasons. But Doc Ock doesn't really do that in this movie very much. However, I am pleasantly surprised, and I do like how Peter ends up using Aunt May's moral lesson from earlier to bring Octavius back around. Like, you don't really realize that they're setting that up until suddenly the end, when Peter really kind of seamlessly combines Aunt May's teachings with a line Doc Ock said earlier about intelligence.
You once spoke to me about intelligence, that it was a gift to be used for the good of mankind. A privilege.
And while I still stand by the fact that Doc Ock hasn't necessarily been a super sympathetic villain, I do really like this moment, and it does provide a nice little bow onto his character arc. Ultimately, yeah, I have some major complaints about Spider-Man 2, but really, I found myself watching this movie and enjoying so much of it. Like, I really did expect to go into this and have as much criticism as I did with Spider-Man 1, but just as the movie got going, I found myself just enjoying so much of it. It really is a huge improvement from Spider-Man 1. Like, I consider Spider-Man 1 to kind of be a bit dated. It doesn't really age well. However, this movie, I'd say, is pretty darn near close to timeless. It probably, I'd say, is one of the best examples of a, like, perfect self-contained, street-level, low-stakes superhero movie. You know, it's not busy setting up sequels, it's not connecting to a bigger universe, or having massive world-ending events, it's just a superhero dealing with some personal stuff, fighting crime, and ultimately a supervillain. I'm not going to say it's the best Spider-Man movie, but it's probably the best movie to show someone to understand Spider-Man as a character. Kind of like how I would say that Batman Begins is the best portrayal of Batman as a character, even though it's not the best Batman movie, if that makes sense. This is certainly a fun, enjoyable movie. I love it, and I'm glad other people love it, even though I might not think that it's a perfect movie. But either way, this is my opinion, and you're free to make your own. Like I said, everything here is made up, and my opinions don't matter. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Y'all stay tuned for the third video about Spider-Man 3. Please let me know what you think about this movie down in the comments below. I love reading people's opinions. If you like this video, please check out my others, and definitely subscribe and hit the bell icon so that you can get notified every time I upload another video, which, at this rate, was probably going to be in a couple months. This has been FilmProv, and as always, don't feed the plants.